One day, when I was an elementary schooler, I think probably 3rd or 4th grade, I was awoken by my mom in a rush. She had overslept, and since she always woke me up in the morning, this meant that I too overslept, and now there was just no way I was going to be ready for school early enough to get on the school bus. School started at 8 a.m, and my bus pickup time was 7 a.m, but it was already like 6:40 or something, and I was still in my pajamas and hadn't even had breakfast yet. So, Mom decided that today, we would just tell the bus driver to go on ahead and she would take me to school, which would give me plenty of time to get ready. So, I'm sitting there at the dining room table eating breakfast, still in my pajamas, and it's now about 6:50. We hear the bus pull up, about 10 minutes earlier than usual. My mom peeks her head out of the door, into the foggy morning, and waves the bus on. She closes the door and comes back inside, but the bus doesn't pull away. There's a knock at the door, and Mom opens it to find a man in a bus driver uniform. He explains that he's a substitute driver because the regular driver called in sick. He says he knows he's a few minutes early, since he wanted to get an early start on the route since he didn't know it well. Mom explains to him that she was going to take me to school since we woke up late. He gets visibly upset and says that he can wait a few minutes since he's already running ahead of schedule. My mom insists that no, I won't be ready to go in a few minutes, and tells him to go on ahead. He seemed angry about this but turned around and got back in the bus and left. I return to eating my breakfast, and still don't have my school clothes on at this point. But at 7 a.m. sharp, another bus pulls up to my house. Mom thinks this is weird and goes outside to talk to them. She comes back inside looking terrified but doesn't really say anything about it and tells me to finish getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what happened, but Mom would end up telling me a few years later. When she went to this second bus, she found that it was being driven by my regular bus driver, and it was full of all the other kids that are usually on the route, and the other bus was empty. Mom asked the driver about the substitute driver and about him calling in sick. I never called in sick. There is no substitute driver on my route, he says. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told my mom to go inside and call the police and report this incident, which she did, without me knowing. There was absolutely no one doing my driver's route that day. However, this was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again. Not even if someone else had ended up being picked up by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are, had I gotten on that bus, I would have never made it to school, or back home. And if Mom hadn't overslept on that specific day, I would have been on that bus.
I'm noting this because I know this story seems completely ridiculous, but the girl I experienced this with is actually insane. A lot of people may have heard about this girl. She was all over the news after she stalked a guy, bombarded him with 65,000 texts, and broke into his house all over one date. We met shortly after she went on that date with him, and we were friends for a while before she broke into his house. At first, she seemed like a nice, albeit quirky, person. I met her when I spent a couple of months visiting the west coast of the US in summer 2017. I thought she was cute, and we spent a lot of time together. We were living next door to each other for a few weeks, and we were never really more than friends. I stopped having any sort of non-platonic feelings after she started to talk a lot about a guy she had met on some dating website. Apparently, he was her soulmate and she had somehow been guided to him by following her birth calendar. I would only later come to know that they had only been on one date and he never spoke to her again. I thought that was weird, but I enjoyed our conversations for the most part and she was funny and nice, so we remained friends. Eventually she moved on to short flings with a guy and then another girl from Tinder. All the while still talking to me about this guy that she was going to marry, saying that she liked how jealous he got when she would tell him about hooking up with other people. A couple of weeks later she started to get really erratic. I confronted her a few times about how she was acting, and she told me that she had recently stopped taking her meds but would start taking them again. She came home one day and decided to tell me that she had a court date coming up for a DUI. Her plan was instead to leave the country and go to South America. I told her what a dumb idea that was, and even though she actually went all the way to the airport in a different city, she wound up coming back. Apparently, her soulmate was no longer answering her texts, and she took that as a sign that she should drag her ass back to where he was and fix their relationship. She was upset that he may be seeing other people, even though it seemed okay to her that she was seeing other people. Later on, she told me she had texted him and said if he blocked her, she would know that meant he wanted her to come find him. Obviously, he blocked her. Obviously, that didn't go over well with her. So, she moved a couple of days later and the summer was ending, and I moved back to the East Coast. I didn't hear from her for a little while, but then we started talking again through text and WhatsApp. She seemed like she was doing better. She told me she had found a roommate and was working on her art again and just generally seemed like she was in a better place. I was happy to have my friend back and healthy, but that didn't last longer than a couple of months. Eventually her behavior started to seem erratic again. She was sending dozens of texts at a time, and they were all over the place. Several of them had to do with her soulmate and how she was still following him even though he had called the police and blocked her. I told her to stop, tried to get her to take her meds, and tried to reason with her 100 times. I was on the opposite side of the country and had no way of getting in touch with her family or friends to try and get them to help her. She was a kind person and a good friend when she was taking care of her mental health, and I cared about her, but I couldn't force her to take care of herself. One day I set aside some time to call her, and I told her that she was overwhelming me and that she really needed to reach out to her family or someone who could help her. She told me I couldn't do that because she needed to stay with me, or she would have to go back to her ex-husband. I don't think any of this is true, but she thought her ex-husband was going to have her killed or followed, that he had the entire police force in his pocket, and had paid off her family to give him intel on her whereabouts and what was going on in her life. I had just moved for a job, and I lived in a small studio in a big city. I had no room for anyone to stay long term, and I wasn't about to do that anyways since she was starting to scare me at this point. She asked me if I was still living at my address, which really freaked me out because I had never given her my address or put it anywhere online, and she wouldn't tell me how she got it. I asked her to leave me alone and told her we couldn't be friends anymore unless she took some steps to get better. She obviously didn't take this well. Though I hated my tiny, cramped apartment, the reason I was drawn to it was because it had great security. It was on the upper floors of a hotel, and no one was allowed through to the residence elevators unless the resident had given their name to security ahead of time and the guest had to show ID. After what happened next, I loved my cramped little apartment because the staff kept me safe. It had been over a week since I had talked to her because I blocked her number and blocked her on WhatsApp. She tried texting me from 4 different phone numbers, but I just blocked them all and never responded. I was walking home from work one day and I was sure I saw her across the street from my building, but it was storming out and I didn't get a good view. I rushed upstairs and calmed myself down in my apartment. Maybe I was just being paranoid. It's a big city. Lots of people have brown hair and glasses. I'm just worried about her. But then the phone rang. The desk was calling to see if I had forgotten to let them know I had a visitor. My heart sank. I asked them who was waiting. They said they tried asking for her name or ID, but she just walked out, and I knew it was her from the way they described her. I texted a mutual friend from over the summer. I wasn't really close with him, so we hadn't stayed in touch, but he told me she had lost it and that he had blocked her too. Apparently, she had gone back on the dating site she met her soulmate on and found someone who looked just like him in my city. She was convinced it was him and had come to find him. This was a very touristy city, but there was just no way this guy had coincidentally come out here. I was sure she had gone bonkers, and I knew she was well aware of where that guy actually lived. I took a page out of her book and used a text-free number to text her that she should leave me alone and I would call the cops if she ever came near me or my building again. In retrospect, I shouldn't have contacted her at all, but I was emotional and not using my better judgment. She said she just wanted to know if I could help her find something. Then I deleted the text-free app so she couldn't reach me again. I lived in a very crowded area, and I knew she couldn't get into my building, but I was still scared whenever I had to take public transit alone at night or was walking through less crowded areas to get home. I had a friend who used to work for the police, and she would drive or walk me home from work whenever she could for a while. She told me I should go ahead and report it even though they couldn't really do anything since she hadn't hurt me and nothing really happened, but I was embarrassed and again I didn't use my better judgment. I felt like it was my fault for engaging with her for so long. I knew she was mentally unstable, and I would still try to be her friend and help her. Maybe I gave her the wrong idea that I could do more for her. I ended up moving to a new city for another job after that and didn't hear from her again. I later found out the reason why was that a couple of months later she had once again gone back to Arizona and had been arrested for breaking into her soulmate's house and using his bathtub. They found a large knife in her car. One summer long ago, I worked for a house painting company made of many small franchises preying on college students for underpaid and overworked employees. Said indentured workforce generally returned to school in late August, and the franchise would close until next summer. I was a lackey who hired everyone, formed crews, met with customers, transported Madari ALS, aka my boss's job, but he preferred, not doing it. Late in the summer, my boss decided to continue into the fall months so he could make more money while depriving me even further of the will to live. So, I had to hire people who were in the painting business but for whatever reason couldn't find a job with a reputable company, and so had no option but to work with us. Jim was a veteran about 45 years old, which was far above my usual 18 to 22 hiring demographic but had impressed me over the phone. As I was essentially painting entire houses myself or with a skeleton crew until I could scrounge up more workers, I didn't interview him in person, just told him to show up ready to go and to meet me and a crew at a new job site 9 a.m. Monday. Life happens as it does, and I had a family emergency that prohibited me from being there on Monday. Some of my summer workers who didn't go off to school would be there, so I texted them explaining to help Jim get used to the way we worked, and make sure to keep it basic. If he was having trouble, send him home and he'd start over with me there the next day. 9:45 a.m. My phone is blown up with texts and calls. I'm at a wake, but I slip outside to hiss into the phone I'm staring at a dead family member and these. Now, what? Jim isn't okay. What do you mean? He's fucking insane. He's ruining this person's roof and he won't listen to us. He keeps screaming at us to shut up. Well, I thought Jim had a point with the last part, since my crew spent more time talking than painting, but I digress. In their infinite wisdom, my crew stuck this new dude up on the roof to paint a teeny space, which would take about 5 minutes with a brush. Homeboy pulls out a 9-inch roller and goes to town, swooping the thing up and down like a skateboarder on a half-pipe, so the entire black roof area below him is covered in beige paint. I tell them to get him down and send him home. I'll deal with it after the wake. I tell my boss what's going on. He brushes it off saying that Jim called him to apologize and tell him he could bring his cousin, Oscar, a guy who's apparently worked as a painter in a union, to the next job. Boss doesn't consult me, says it's fine, and I have to deal with it. New job site, new day, I still hate my life. Oscar isn't in a union, but he did work as a painter for over a decade, until he was put in jail for armed robbery, a jail stint that he was fresh out of as of a week ago. To Oscar's credit, he was very polite and respectful. I had asked to speak to him alone before I let him set foot on my job site, and he was completely upfront about his jail time and what led to it, answering any questions I had. I was convinced, and he did an excellent job. My boss stopped by for the first time in forever and was also impressed by Oscar. So impressed that he decided Oscar and Jim would take on a job by themselves, a job that was mostly trim work for a family of mom, pop, and 3 daughters. He also decided that he would take care of all the customer interaction except for me dropping off the extra tall ladder halfway through to reach one ridiculously small but very high piece. Halfway through the job, I show up like a good peon, massive ladder in tow. Jim is listening to music, and I see Oscar furtively look at him then wave to me to keep driving and park around the corner. Oscar sprints to my car and tells me that Jim has been making the owners and their daughters very uncomfortable, and my boss had been ignoring their calls. Oscar had told them privately to wait until the day I came, and he would make sure I talked to them. I thanked Oscar, told him that I would deal with it right then, and requested he hang around and proceed as if everything is fine in case I needed his assistance in any capacity. I pulled into the driveway, nodded at Jim, and knocked on the door. I was pulled in almost immediately by a frantic mother. The family was Russian, so I was treated to a deluge of information that I could mostly understand. Apparently, Jim had been very opportunistic about his ladder positions as he worked on the second floor of the house, and they were conveniently always able to see directly into the girls' bedrooms, which he took pictures of on his phone. He also made multiple comments to the girls as they came home from school that were a freaking football field past the line of how you speak to a customer or their kids, massively inappropriate sexual comments. I managed to keep myself from melting into the floor and promise them that this will be dealt with immediately. With that, I walk out to confront Jim. I ask if I can use his phone because mine was dead, and after he hands it over, I find almost 100 pictures of the various bedrooms from every angle possible, zoomed in, etc. He sees me open the pictures from his position on the ladder and starts flying down and screaming at me. He launches at me, and Oscar puts himself in between us, yelling at Jim to calm down. Jim panics and flees for his car, leaving his phone with me. Police were called and I handed the phone over, was interviewed. Poor Oscar almost had a panic attack, but they said they would work with the family and take it from there. I finished the job with Oscar, we get tipped, and the family thanked us for our role in helping them as they didn't really know how to handle what Jim was doing. Time passes and I'm home watching TV in the living room. It's about 9 p.m. Light floods the room as a car pulls up my neighbor's driveway with its lights on. I don't care, I continue watching TV. A few minutes pass and I hear yelling from neighbor's house. I look out the window and it's Jim's car in their driveway because my boss had given him my home address as where to pick up the checks at the end of each week. He got confrontational, yelling at the neighbors where was I, when really all he had to do was turn around to see my idiotic slack-jawed face staring out the window about 6 feet away. Then he pulled out a handgun and started motioning at the wife. Before I can even register this is actually happening or grab my own gun, which I would have heroically used to shoot myself in the foot or something, my living room is filled with red and blue lights as multiple police cars pull up and consequently arrest Jim. Jim had 4 guns in the passenger seat of his car, one of which was an AR-15 and another a shotgun. He apparently had only taken one out to wave over his head, leaving the other 3 in the car because he wasn't 100% sure which house was mine. My neighbors are elderly, nosy, snarky, and call the cops on any and everything of little to no consequence. They called as soon as his beater car pulled up in their driveway, and their knee-jerk 911 reaction likely saved my life.